This is Nate, the Vinyl Guide, and in my experience, there seems to be two types of people in this world. Those who love the music of Jonathan Coulton, and those who have yet to be introduced to his work. Now, I'm hoping this is going to be a fun discussion for those of you who are in either camps. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Now, before we get started, fans of your work refer to you as Joko. Is that just for typing purposes, shortening typing, or do they also verbally call you Joko?
No, people do call me Joko verbally as well. That was the thing that happened many years ago, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody in a comment on a blog post on my website suggested Joko, and I thought it was kind of hilarious, and it stuck. And it's been a very convenient moniker. It's nice to have a short little name, especially when you're a part-time famous person, part-time family man. It's nice to have a little suggestion of an alter ego.
Okay, so at some point, when you're with your family, you're Jonathan, but when you're out in the public eye, it's Joko.
I guess that's the way it works. Yes,
Okay.
it would be unusual for my family members to refer to me as Joko.
Okay, or when they're being very sarcastic and snipey. Okay, Joko.
That's right. That's the only time they refer to me as Joko. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Now, before we get into discussion around the new album, Solid State, which is available at jonathancoulton.com. You don't have joko.com, by the way, do you?
No, I don't. You know what? Joko is also a short name for Johnson County. Was that Kentucky? I don't know. But sometimes if I Google Joko, I end up with the local newspaper for Johnson County.
Oh, okay. All right. Handy tip for those of you in Kentucky. So before we get into the new album, Solid State, and of course talking about the availability of it on vinyl and some of your other releases, let's look back a bit further to the early years. What was young Jonathan life like?
I grew up in Connecticut, mostly in a rural part of the state where there were a lot of woods and trees and ponds. I had my parents were both musical. They played instruments and sang, and that was always kind of a big part of my life is having people around me singing and playing instruments and listening to music as well. But I don't know. I had a sort of normal American kid upbringing in the context of rural Connecticut, if that means anything to anybody.
Okay. So any siblings?
Yes, I had. So my parents were divorced when I was maybe 4 or 5, and they each remarried, and they each had additional children. So I have in one family I have a half sister, and in the other family I have a half sister and a half brother. But until I was 8 years old, I was an only child.
Oh.
So I kind of got the best of both worlds.
You got a lot of attention early on, and then of course you exploded with a large, wider family.
That's right.
So what kind of music was around the house? What kind of records did you have?
My dad was a big Beatles fan. So there were a lot of those lying around, and I do have very fond memories of listening to Sgt. Pepper and looking at that sleeve and trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Mm-hmm. as a very young kid, trying to puzzle out what that meant, because I guess that was sort of my first exposure to this idea of it being a concept album, of something that was a concept album. Because I knew the Beatles music and I knew Beatles songs and I liked them, but then to sit there in this way and look at those crazy images and those costumes that they were wearing, and then try to think, well, what is there some kind of a thread here between these songs? It was, this was very young. This is when I was still figuring everything out. So it was kind of mind blowing to think that there could be a larger thing outside of a song.
It wasn't just the imagery, kind of figuring out why, because you don't see people dressed in Sgt. Pepper outfits in rural Connecticut. So why are they this way? And then what do the songs mean? Was there some sort of allure to trying to crack this code?
Well, yes. I mean, I have always listened to music with an ear to to the songwriter's intent, I guess. Without, I don't want to sound highfalutin, but I remember being a little kid and sitting in the back seat of a car and hearing a song and asking my parents, "What is that song about?" And really being interested in not just what the words were, but what was that person trying to say. So yeah, I was always kind of trying to crack the nut of what a song was, and then in particular Sgt. Pepper, to have it be meta in that way, to have the first song be about the band in the context of a live show, and then they were introducing a singer in the band who was going to come out and do a song, and then suddenly you were in the album. It was a really, really, really mind-blowing way to start a record.
Those were your dad's records. Those were your parents' records, the Beatles, and obviously they helped form you. What music did you start to discover that was yours?
Oh, boy. That was mine. It's always, there's always kind of I feel like there's always kind of a gray area between what your parents listen to and what you listen to. And, watching my own kids, watching their musical taste develop, I remember, I'm noticing the same kind of thing that happened to me, which is that, my dad and my mom both were kind of listening to, there were some Beatles floating around, there was some Billy Joel floating around, there was some Dan Fogelberg floating around. I think, funnily enough, I think it was my dad who first played a Pink Floyd record for me. But around the same time, my friends were getting interested in Pink Floyd as well. So it was kind of a parallel thing, and that feels like my music and my discovery. Even though I think technically my dad was the first one to play an album for me. I remember. Let's see. You sort of pick up on what your friends are interested in, for good or for ill. I had a friend who was really into the Boomtown Rats for a while, and so I had a couple of their records, the sort of circle of REM and early sort of alternative rock and college radio and Husker Du for a while. I really tried to like Husker Du, but they were too loud for me. I had a good friend who loved Husker Du, and I dutifully listened to many of those albums.
Was there an album where your dad or your parents said, that really isn't very good?
I'm trying to think if there was a thing that I liked that really drove my parents crazy. No, I don't think so. They were always pretty open. They were always pretty open to stuff. And truth be told, I was, I'm right now I'm on tour with Amy Mann, and I was just this morning I was having a conversation with some of the guys in her band who, as kids, they were all into Kiss, and I knew a lot of kids who were into Kiss, but I had this whole thing where I really did not like loud, distorted guitars. And I really did not like the kind of bombastic theatricality that came with rock music in those days. Led Zeppelin scared me a little bit. Kiss was certainly scary to me. Van Halen, I was kind of like, it's too loud, too noisy. So I feel like there was much music of my peers that would have offended my parents, but because I had delicate sensibilities and had been brought up on Beatles and Billy Joel and Dan Fogelberg, I was hard for me to embrace anything that was too scary to grown-ups because it was too scary to me to begin with.
Okay, fair enough. So aside from the records the Dan Fogelberg and Billy Joel records in your room, what other things did you do? Did you have, I imagine you had a computer in your room as well, yeah?
Well, let's see. Once that was possible, when I was a little kid, there weren't really home computers. But yeah, I went through. I remember my grandfather had a Radio Shack TRS-80 computer. That when we visited them, I would stepped through the word processing tutorials,
Hmm.
and I learned a little bit of basic programming. I had a Commodore 64 at home. I think my dad got some kind of Apple IIe or something along those lines.
Ah, there we go.
Um,
Now you're talking my language here. All
yeah,
right.
well, there you go.
Do you play Little Brick Out?
Yep, they're so yeah, computers were definitely floating around, and that was another big interest of mine, and not just in terms of playing video games, but using computers to make stuff. I always thought that was pretty cool, and so it's been very satisfying to as my life and career have unfolded that I do kind of end up working with music and with computers a lot because those have always been two big interests of mine.
Good. So, as you grew up, it sounds like computers and programming that was looking more like your path for a career, or did you have other thoughts around that?
No, I was pretty convinced I was going to be a musician. By the time I was in uh, junior high and high school, I was writing songs. I was able to sort of uh, play other people's songs on the guitar, play and sing on the guitar, and then I started writing my own songs. And I had a 4-track cassette recorder that I was messing around with and adding other vocal tracks and other guitar parts, and so I was pretty into it, and I really did feel like, yeah, this is a thing that I could do as a career, and it would be satisfying. And obviously, it wasn't. It doesn't feel like the most practical career choice, but it was definitely a thing I was interested in. And I remember in high school saying, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a musician. Um, and then of course I went to college, which is not a thing you need to do to become a musician, but I did anyway. And then I moved to New York and almost immediately got a software job instead.
Oh,
So in many ways, the software was the was the backup plan that I immediately went to when it became clear that the music business stuff was going to be hard.
let's go quickly nerdy here. What kind of software what languages were you writing?
Well, let's see. First basic. Boy, I think that might have been all I did as a kid. Not until college. I took a course where we learned some Lisp, and then once there was an internet, I started doing some HTML stuff, and then after college, in life and in my software career, I was working in, let's see, first I worked in a piece of software called Microsoft Access, which was a database
Hmm.
creation software. And then Microsoft SQL Server. This is great for your vinyl listeners, right? They
Yeah.
they love this kind of talk. Microsoft SQL Server, some Visual Basic, but I was never really into I never really got into the deep, what I always think of as the cooler languages. C. That's a serious one, right?
Yeah.
People who write in C. That's the real stuff.
Exactly. You start to fall off a cliff at that point. C, C++. But this is back in the day when you could actually make a living doing HTML and some of the basic stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Coding was still a bit voodoo to most businesses. So if someone kind of knew what they were doing, even the easy stuff, you could get a job. This is during the .com boom. Was that the timeline kind of?
Yeah, so my software job was during the .com boom, and it's interesting because the company that I worked for was not a .com company at all. It had almost no web internet component to it. I mean, it was software that people installed on their desktop computers, and so I watched some peers go through that boom and bust cycle. At first, cursing my bosses for not being a .com company, and then being very grateful that they were not a .com company, because they wrote it out. Their business didn't change at all, and not so much for pets.com and Cosmo.com.
So while you're doing software, which gave you kind of the financial security to pursue your musical hobbies, how did you make that transition from software programmer to musician?
Well, so throughout that period when I was working at that company, I was still writing and recording at home, just for myself, and making cassette tapes for my friends. Um, and I had a couple of bands, nothing much to speak of. We rarely rehearsed, we rarely played, and when we played, our friends would come out and see us and hoot and holler, and but, nothing ever went anywhere. So it was really mostly a hobby. And then a friend of mine, who I knew from college, his name is John Hodgman. He was also a frustrated creative person. He wanted to be a writer, but he was working as an editor at a publishing company. And he quit that job to pursue writing full time. And he started doing this thing in Brooklyn. He started putting on this show that was a monthly reading series / variety show of sorts, where each show would have a topic, and he would invite people to speak or give a presentation or a slideshow or all sorts of different demonstrations and conversations around that theme. And he invited me to start writing a song for every one of those shows. So suddenly I had a reason to write stuff, and I had this built-in audience that I was performing in front of. And it was in those years that I kind of started to get a better feeling for what it was that I was good at, and what kind of things I did that people would respond to. And that was really the beginnings of feeling like, oh, maybe there is a way to do this. Because, of course, when I first moved to New York, there wasn't really an internet to speak of, certainly not in the context of the music business. And it was all, you had to make a demo tape and bring it around to record labels and wait to get signed. And by the time I started playing as part of this John Hodgman show, there were MP3s, there were podcasts, there were blogs, and this idea that you could pretty easily publish your own music and even sell your own music to people that you didn't even need to be in the same room with. It all started to feel like a real possibility. So that was the beginning of that feeling. And then eventually, to be honest, what happened is I became a parent. My daughter was born in 2005, and I was home for a few weeks after she was born, and going back to my software job just felt totally wrong. And that's when I said to myself, well, in a few years, this kid is going to be old enough to be embarrassed that her dad is a lazy musician bum. So if I'm going to be a lazy musician bum, now is the time before she notices. So that's when I was like, all right, let's quit the job. Let's spend a year pretending that it's your job to be a musician and see how that goes. And it went well enough that it sort of has continued on from there.
Okay. And this is when you started the Thing a Week songwriting challenge?
That's exactly right. So once I was home from that job, I really didn't want to waste all that time just sitting around playing Xbox, which is something that I could have easily done. So I decided to give myself a job. Since nobody else was giving me a musical job, I gave myself a musical job, which was to record a new song every week and release it on my website, and to do that for a year. That was my goal, and just to see what would happen. And yeah, over the course of that year, a couple of those songs had these little viral moments and really started to reach large numbers of people, and that was kind of exciting, and certainly one of the things that made me feel like if I keep doing this, maybe I will have more success.
Yeah. So stuff's happening here. You can see the needle moving a bit. Now, when you have that sort of approach to forced creativity, I mean, really, you put yourself on a deadline. Every Monday, I'm going to release a song or whatever. Does that get a bit dangerous? Like, you could develop a formula, perhaps get tempted to get stuck into a bit of a process just to meet that deadline?
Um, yeah, although I think that that's harder than you would think. If there were, I feel like if there were a pattern for writing a song every week, I would do it.
Hmm.
And um, uh, I think the interesting thing about it for me was that there were some weeks that came easily, but most weeks came very hard. And it was such an instructive year for me to realize that even in a week where I had no ideas that I liked, and even very little time to work on something, or whatever other difficulties were in my life, that simply by sitting down every day and working, I could always make something happen. And it wasn't always great. It rarely was great. There's a lot of mediocre songs in that bunch, but sometimes it was. And that was the thrilling thing to realize, is that the same dumb rote process of showing up every day and putting time in it was completely unpredictable whether it would lead to a song that I didn't care about that much, or a song that I really loved and that became, what is now a sort of classic part of the Jonathan Coulton canon, to the extent something exists like that.
So is that how the song Code Monkey came about? I mean, that's kind of the free bird that you have to play in each concert, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of them for sure. That's a song that I wrote, somewhere in the middle of that Thing a Week project, and yeah, I wish I could say there was something, some reason why that song happened that week, but I don't know. That was just the thing that was there when I showed up.
When you were releasing Code Monkey, it was just another song. You didn't realize, oh, okay, this is very unique or special. It was just another week in your feet.
No, I would finish a song. I don't know. You're really close to it when you finish it. It's hard to say whether it's good or bad, and it's even harder to say whether or not other people are going to respond to it. So I never once got it right. I mean, I would put a song out and say, oh, but people are going to really love this one. This is really going to go crazy. And then, I was wrong. And then I would put one out and I say, well, this isn't very good, or this is weird. And then people go nuts for it. It's like, it's just so, I mean, anybody who works in the creative business will tell you it's really difficult to predict what is going to be a hit and what is not. And if that were not the case, people would make hits all the time. And it's no less true for the person who's writing, until you have a little distance on it, I think.
Now, the topics you generally write about are very amusing. Robots in space. You seem to channel childhood thoughts very well. But then, of course, next to those songs, there's a track like Today with Your Wife, which is gut-wrenching, very touching, very emotional. How do you manage that balance of humor and the emotional, touching songs?
Well, I will say that for me, even the humorous songs have an element of have an emotional quality to me, and a even sometimes a kind of darkness to them. And in the same respect, when I'm writing about something sad, I like to find a little bit of humor in it as a kind of distance. And I suppose I deal with sadness in my own life that way too. So for me, there are definitely funny songs and there are definitely sad songs, and there are ones that are completely serious and ones that are completely goofy. But there's a lot of gray area for me. And a song like Today with Your Wife, yeah, there's not too much humor in that one. That's a pretty brutal one. But there's a song called I Crush Everything that is about a giant squid who loves ships but destroys them, and has sworn off them, and has sort of exiled himself to the bottom of the sea. And he's talking about how much he misses the ships, but he can't be with them, and he's in a very, very dark, depressed place. And when I play that song for audiences, if it's a new audience, if it's an audience that's new to me and hasn't heard that song before, they laugh. Because there are a couple of lines in there that are kind of funny. But if it's an audience that has heard the song many times, it's a pin drop quiet. And because people find those same lines very sad. And I think it's a question of perspective and empathy, where if I'm writing about a mad scientist who is in love with a woman that he has captured and taken to his taken to his lair. On the one respect, you can laugh at how inept he is and how he thinks he's being romantic, but he's actually a terrible person and he doesn't know. But on another level, if you empathize with him a little bit and you say, how hard must it be for this guy to relate to other human beings that he thinks he's doing a good job wooing this woman, and what must have happened to him throughout his life that he had that problem. So I think I don't know, I'm going maybe a little too deep into the answer to your question, but to me the sadness and the humor and the sort of serious emotional stuff and the funny emotional stuff are more closely connected than I think is otherwise apparent. And that's, for me, that's the thing that drives the writing of a song.
Well, you tend to humanize the giant squid or the pirate or whoever the main protagonist is in your story with real human emotions, qualities, thoughts, self-doubt.
Yeah.
Do you go that deep when you're writing, or does it kind of surprise you once you've kind of written the words like, oh, okay, yeah, is it willful?
Yeah, I think it is willful, because I guess the thing that I keep coming back to is everybody's got problems, and whatever your problem is, that's a real problem for you. Even if it seems like a dumb problem to somebody else, for you, it's a real problem. And so, when I'm writing about a giant squid who is depressed and has a lot of self-loathing, it's a funny idea, unless you're the giant squid. It's not funny at all if you're the giant squid. So yeah, I like to try to embody the point of view. I like to get inside the point of view of a character that I don't really relate to, and I like to try to think from inside their heads and say, well, what is their problem and how does it make them feel? That to me is a really fascinating mental exercise, and yeah, it leads me to write some lines where I'll write a line in the voice of this character, and then I'll take a step back and say, oh man, that's really brutal. That's really sad for that guy. And that's always very exciting.
So would it be fair to say that the majority of your characters are you, just in a different form?
I think, yes and no. I mean, I don't set out to put myself into everything, but of course it's unavoidable. There are times when I'll write a song and 3 years later, I'll revisit that song and say, oh my God, that's autobiographical. And I had no idea all of this time. But there's also this phenomenon that happens where, I'm pulling points of view and ideas from my brain and from everybody around me. So there's this other thing that happens where people will say, oh my God, that song is about me, isn't it? I'll say, well, no. No, it's not, actually. It's interesting that you would say that. But I am sort of taking little bits and pieces from everyone's perspective and putting them in there. So yeah, some of it's me, but some of it's my wife, and some of it's my kids, and some of it's my friends, and some of it's a mad scientist that I'm imagining, and some of it's a giant squid who's depressed. It's hard to untangle.
When you're partway through the writing process, and let's say you're writing a ballad song, but the topic is about zombies or He-Man or something like that, do you pause and maybe doubt the absurdity or the humor in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's there are definitely songs that I've written where I get halfway down the road and I'm like, this is just ridiculous. This is absurd. But that was the thing about Thing a Week that was so helpful to me, is that, nothing bad happens if you write all the way through. If it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. It doesn't take away from your life and the rest of your career to see a bad idea through to the finish. And sometimes those bad ideas turn out to be pretty good after all, or you learn a thing just by doing that. So yeah, but that's certainly happened where I've been in the middle of a song and said, well, this is too silly.
Do you play it for friends and say, "Ooh, what's your thoughts on this?" Or do you tend to keep it in a box and only reveal it when you feel it's done?
Boy, no, I keep it in a box. I don't like to. If I'm writing a song by myself, I won't play. I generally will not play it for anyone until I think it is finished. Which is a very different process from, if I'm collaborating with somebody, I'll write half an idea and send it to them and say, fix this. But if it's a song that I intend to write all myself, no, I can't stand to give anything unfinished to somebody, and I certainly don't want anybody's opinion.
Yeah. That's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah.
So your career trajectory has been quite unique, essentially giving away your music until you found different ways to, earn a living through it. How does your intellectual property rights management work on your catalog?
So most of my music has a Creative Commons license, which is it's a kind of license that sits on top of copyright. It doesn't replace it, but it gives back some rights that copyright takes away. And it lets creators customize which of those rights they're giving back. So my music you're allowed to share it for free and to send it to other people and to download it for free from a place that you can find it. Which doesn't mean that I don't want your money if you would like to buy it. You're also free to use it to create a new thing of your own, whether it's a video that you put on YouTube or a short story that you write based on it, or artwork that you create based on it. And as long as that stuff is non-commercial in nature, you're allowed to do that without my permission. It's been interesting because I think the side effect of letting the music find its way like that is that there have been a lot of things that fans have created that I never would have created myself that have found their way into other fans' hands. So there are people who have made music videos for my songs on YouTube that have been viewed millions of times by people, and I don't have any videos that I've made that have been viewed millions of times by people. So it's kind of, it's very satisfying on a personal and artistic level to see that somebody created a thing based on, somebody was inspired by a thing that you did and inspired them to create a new thing, and other people like that thing. That's a really satisfying thing to watch. But it's also, from a crass marketing perspective, it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, people are making things that, new things that find their own way and create new fans for me. It's the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah. You're a bit like an API, and you're allowing people to plug into it.
That's exactly right.
So now you've also got, you've got a very, dedicated fan base, and they enjoy participating as well because you have those abilities in your digital rights management to allow them to. Things like Jokopedia, an entire wiki site that's dedicated to everything about you, live sets, dissecting your songs. There's even tags for the themes, like stress, depression, songs about cats. How involved are you in Jokopedia?
Not at all. I have corrected a couple of guitar tabs and lyrics, I think, but that started by itself and runs by itself, and I don't even go in there. The only time I go in there is when I need to look up the lyrics to my own songs. But yeah, it's a crazy thing to. This is one of the things the internet does, is it enables people to gather around a thing that they like and talk about it and create categorize it and criticize it and make new things around it. And yeah, the Jokopedia, that's a crazy thing. What a crazy time we live in.
Is it kind of weird? Sometimes you late at night, you're just thinking, oh my God, people are updating a website about me.
Absolutely. I mean, there is nothing weirder than being a famous person, even a very mildly famous person like me. It is a very strange thing to think of somebody that you don't even know thinking about you. It's weird. It's a weird thing.
How do you rationalize it?
I mean, I guess I know what it's like. I'm a fan of famous people. So it's not an alien concept to me, except that it is applied to me, because I don't feel like a famous person. I don't feel like a person worthy of any extra attention, and so it is always strange to me to see that is happening, or to think about that happening. But as I say, I recognize like I know what it's like when somebody makes a piece of art that I love and that I want to learn more about them and think about that art, and that art inspires me. So it's completely understandable and familiar to me, and in that way, it's very gratifying. I mean, that's what I will say, that the two, there are a couple of aspects of fame, and one is this idea that people are experiencing your art and being affected by it and interested in it, and the other is that they are recognizing you because they know that you're famous, and that is the part that is, I could take or leave. I don't really care to be recognized anywhere, and I don't need to be famous in that way. It is not important to me. In fact, it is even that in and of itself is kind of unsettling. But I wouldn't trade the other aspect of it, connecting with people through art. I wouldn't trade that for the world. That's one of the most satisfying feelings I have in my life, is when somebody sends me an email, or even just says something on Twitter. I'm listening to your new song and I think it's amazing and it made me cry. It's like, what else do you need in this world? It's a great thing.
Sounds like you've got the best of all situations there. So let's jump to Artificial Heart. Now, you had this thing a week happening where you were doing a lot of, binging and purging, let's say rapid fire songwriting. Now, in the last few years, Artificial Heart and Solid State, there's 3 and 5 year gaps that you're starting to move into Tool release schedule territory here.
Yeah.
Why the distance now?
I think, I think part of it is that I have my job has changed and diversified quite a bit. So in a thing of weekdays, I didn't have anything else to do besides write songs. So I could write a song a week. For me to do that now would be a lot more challenging, because I have to work in touring when I'm doing it. I have, I'm a on-air personality for NPR in the show called Ask Me Another, which is like a weekly quiz show. I run with a couple of other people the Joko Cruise, which is an annual fan cruise. I'm also a dad and a husband and family guy. And so all those things together mean it's a lot harder for me to sit down and have focused time to write. And that's in many ways an excuse, but it's also, for me, it is nice to let the field lie fallow for a little while. And it's I like to be able to cross-train on these various jobs and take the songwriting hat off for a while and work on another thing. It's nurturing to be able to change gears in that way and think like a business person for a while, or to think like a public radio personality for a while, whatever that means.
Broke.
But it's nice to have all those different hats. So yeah, I don't know if there's a method behind waiting so long between albums, except to say that's sort of where I find myself, and I can only write when I feel like I I want to sit down and dedicate that time, and I don't always. So
To me, that seems very trusting, I guess, or secure where you're at, because I know a lot of artists that one of their fears is that the public will forget them.
sure.
So to be able to give them that 5-year break between Artificial Heart and Solid State, that must have taken that couldn't have always been comfortable.
Yeah, and it's certainly, I will say that the peak of this the peak of Jocomania is the term I just now coined. I would say around 2007 was the time when I felt like there was the most activity around my status as a musician and songwriter and famous person. And maybe that was just a time of explosive growth for me and my fan base. But that is the time when it felt juiciest, where I was getting the most inquiries from the press, where I was getting the most number of fan mails, where it was relatively easy for me to bend social media to my will and get attention on social media. And that feeling has faded, and I'm sure in no small part due to the long gaps between times that I put out new music. But yeah, I mean, it is a kind of trust, but it's less that, and it's more. This is just how it works for me, and I don't think I would be happy if I felt like I had to produce on a certain schedule. I mean, for goodness sake, the reason I don't have a real job is because I don't want to have anybody telling me what to do. So if I can't take charge of this job, then I'm lost.
Yeah.
The whole point of this is I'm supposed to be able to do whatever I want.
you don't want to hop off of someone else's treadmill and just hop onto your own.
No, I don't, but it's tempting to do so. I mean, anybody. I think this is a common thing certainly in the music business, is that you do feel this treadmill aspect to it, that you have to keep getting out there, or people will forget about you. You got to keep putting new music out. You got to keep the pressure on, and keep touring and coming back to these same cities over and over again, and bigger and bigger. And next time we'll get a bus, and next time we'll have a bigger band, and that kind of thinking exhausts me, because it really feels like, it's no other way to say it. It feels like a set of obligations that doesn't come from inside me, and I would much rather have a less profitable and less famous career, and do the things that I care about doing and the things that I'm interested in doing.
So that brings us to Solid State, your brand new album, your first in 5 years. What is the narrative of Solid State? Is it political?
It was not intended to be political. I wrote, when I started writing Solid State, I was really just writing songs. I didn't seek out a concept album. I was just writing songs. And the songs that I was writing, I noticed, had a common theme, which is that the internet sucks now. And that's sort of what kept coming up in the songs that I was writing. Because I was finding the internet to be a frustrating place. And I was finding that the early promise of the internet as this place that would connect us and unite us, and remove all barriers to understanding, and democratize the world and culture, and make it possible for anybody to make a living as an artist. All that stuff, had the promise of that had kind of dropped off, and suddenly the internet was an angry place, and it was a frustrating, stressful place, and the middlemen that were the record labels had suddenly been replaced by the middlemen that were the streaming services, so that's what I was writing about. And as the project expanded, it became more of a larger story about what is this thing, the internet? What does it mean to us as humans? And looking at how humanity has incorporated these new, really world-changing technologies into their culture, and thinking about how is that going to work with the internet, and just sort of thinking long term. We're really on the early part of the arc. that is humans understanding the internet and humans incorporating the internet into our culture. And it feels like a painful, difficult time in which we are learning a lot of things, but also not learning a lot of things. And, I guess by the time I was finished writing Solid State, the message that I was really trying to get across was this idea that we, even though we have these new tools of communication and even though it is changing us, we're still the same. We still have the capacity to be the same selfish, terrible people we've always been. And that now more than ever, we need to try to listen to each other and understand each other and take care of each other and recognize that we're all human beings with thoughts and feelings. And it's a real challenge. And then, somewhere in the middle of that, essentially internet troll culture won the presidency of the United States. So it suddenly felt, on the one hand, naive to say we still can save ourselves and we still can find empathy with one another. It suddenly felt like, well, no, we can't. Look what just happened. But then it also took on this new kind of political relevance that I don't think I certainly did not intend to be there, but I can definitely see how you could read it that way. And I do think we are sort of on the cusp of this choice and this change that is pretty well that this current administration is pretty emblematic of, and the way the election went down and the way people are talking about all of these issues now. I think it's really feels like a very important time in our history as humans. It feels like a real pivot point. And I just hope we pivot in the right direction.
So it's an uplifting message is what you're trying to say here.
Well, it is. I mean, in the end, for me, the story that is on Solid State and is in the companion graphic novel is this idea that the technology itself is not going to save us, because the technology is just going to amplify who we are, and in a way that's terrible in the short term, because everybody has a voice, but also, oh God, everybody has a voice. But at the same time, I think exposure to that, amplifying ourselves, is making us realize, oh wow, we really need to work on this stuff. And I'm a liberal, and I'm a liberal who, even the past couple of years, has learned a lot about feminism and has learned a lot about racism. And I've had to ask some hard questions about myself and my own thoughts and behaviors. And it's felt like a very productive year or two for me in that respect. And I am hopeful that that it's like that for many other people as well. And hopefully eventually it will be that way for everybody.
It's interesting because just really there's no better illustration of the efficiency of the powers that be than the internet. We used to be controlled by banks and corporations. Then the internet came along. It was a bit of a free for all. And then all of a sudden, what kind of ads are we getting? Banks and corporations.
Yeah.
Same sort of arc as something like Burning Man. The first year was great, and then all of a sudden here comes Pepsi. So that is a cycle that I think humans are going to continue to go through.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and that feels like it. That's part of the naivete that I'm talking about. Is that when the internet first came along, I was like, oh, here we go, all the problems are solved. I think all the man is gone, but no, the man's not gone. The man just had to retool and figure out how to get ads in your face again. But I do think it's progress. And I guess another message, in particular the song Solid State, which is reprised at the end of the album, is this idea that, it's messy and it's chaotic and it can be shitty sometimes, but this is progress. This is the progress that we want. This is what we are choosing. And to say that we don't like it means that we need to change ourselves. And to say that we're going to somehow stop it and go back is crazy and impossible. So here we are. we have to make it work, whatever that means.
So Solid State is also your first major foray into vinyl, including an interesting kind of animated cover art. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the approach to now making Joko material available on vinyl?
Yeah, well, vinyl recently came back on my radar. Like many Americans, I abandoned vinyl for many years because CDs were smaller, and then recently I got a record player again, and I dragged out my records and my wife's records and got some records from some other people and started buying records again. And I forgot what a pleasure it is to not just to handle these giant discs, but the physicality of it is very satisfying, and the artwork, the giant artwork on this giant piece of cardboard is really nice. But also something about the setting of it, something about putting on an entire album, or not even a side of an album, and deciding that you're going to listen to that whole thing all at once, instead of just putting on a Pandora station of a certain kind of music, or shuffling your iTunes or whatever, to have this kind of focused listening experience is a thing that I had forgotten how much I like. So that's part of it for me, is my own renewed interest in vinyl makes me want to provide a way for people to listen to my music in that way, in that kind of focused way. And certainly it being a concept album means that more than ever, I would like people to sit down and listen to the whole thing and not just shuffle the songs. I mean, boy, it's just the very idea of somebody shuffling these songs with other of my songs. It's like, no, that's not what I meant.
They've got to listen to them in a particular sequence. Now, you were talking about the as you were writing Solid State and the songs were coming together, then you were realizing what the concept was about. Is it then you started working on the companion book of that narrative?
The album was mostly done by the time the book happened, and once the album was, I had the arc of the story done when the album was maybe 3/4 done, and I wrote a few more songs to fill in some gaps in that story. And then I handed this outline to Matt Fraction, the writer of the book, and he wrote the book, and Albert Montes drew it. So between the two of them, they really fleshed out the details that were missing in my outline, and they did an amazing job. I mean, those pages would come back to me, and I was really affected by them, and they really told the story in a way that held on to all of the emotional content that I felt I wanted to be in there.
Oh, the package absolutely looks amazing. I'd really like to encourage folks to go over to jonathancoulton.com and pick up a copy of Solid State on vinyl. Plus, you can get a package with the book, the companion book he was talking about. Very heavy, thick bound, looks like a very quality production. The vinyl itself also has this interesting animation, which there's a video online that shows you what they mean. It's the first time I've seen that on vinyl, so very innovative and very cool. There's also deluxe bundles and packs that you can get. Of course, if you want the CD, you can get those as well, but I highly recommend the vinyl. And that's available at jonathancoulton.com. Real quick, Jonathan, any hope for an Artificial Heart re-release on vinyl?
Yeah, I intend to do that. You know, I made vinyl for that record and sold quite a few of them, and people really liked it. So, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about going back and doing vinyl for everything. I think that would be fun. Honestly, I just need to get the guts of a physical store together somehow before I could do that. But yeah, I would like to.
Okay, well, the mastering's done. The plates are done. Just stamp out a...
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, put me
Just
on
print
that
some
list.
more.
I want one of those.
I will.
Absolutely. All right, Jonathan, thank you very much. Good luck with the tour. Good luck with the new album, Solid State by Jonathan Coulton at jonathancoulton.com. Take care, Joko.
Thank you.